Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia.
And I'm Alex Ozar, co-director of JLIC at Yale University, and this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort that has always been and will always be Talmud, high-level, richly meaningful, thoughtfully creative Torah learning, ambitiously attuned to the realities of where our students are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening.
Today, on this podcast episode, we don't have a fourth or even a third person joining us.
Oh no. What do we do?
Rav Alex, what do you think we should talk about?
Oh man. You want to talk about Israel? I feel like nobody talks about Israel. Should we do that?
I don't know. There's probably not too much to talk about. That might fill like 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, I know, as a campus professional now, and as a rabbi on campus, this takes up basically none of my time. And I think we should probably drop the sarcasm bit and get into it. This takes up all of my time, all of it, for a very long time. And I have to make sure it doesn't take up all of my time because there are a lot of other really, really important things like regular Torah and mitzvot and just the work of Jewish community and daily Jewish community life and Shabbos and Yontif and just everything that makes up the fabric of Jewish life. But Israel is a hot topic and consumes the attention of our students, both because it is in the news for the hardest reasons. It is a source of both really deep pain and worry and anxiety, just from the things on the surface level of the news. And it is the object of our tefillot, individually and communally, and of our publicly shared and privately whispered hopes and fears. But also because in 2025, our relationship with the state of Israel is highly controversial and complicated, especially on, let's say, an elite East Coast university campus, where the dominant political culture is progressive, highly progressive, and in a world where progressive political culture has consolidated in a very powerfully anti-Israel formation, and where students regularly, constantly, are forced to choose precisely because they're Jewish and they identify as Jewish. They are presumed to be genocide supporters unless they prove otherwise. And that's hard just regardless of your perspective. And Don, I'm curious to hear what your perspectives were even just a few years ago on campus. I think when we grew up, you in Richmond and St. Louis, respectively, we both grew up in more or less Zionist shuls and schools. In my case, I can say very, very confidently, very clearly and unambiguously Zionist shuls and schools. Went to Yeshiva Keren B'Yavneh and then YU. Everywhere I've been institutionally was just unambiguously, in a completely uncomplicated way, pro-Israel, taken for granted. And I don't think we really gave much thought at all to the idea that there were people within our community who broke from that consensus at all. You knew there was this or that person who had certain feelings about the settlements or the occupation, something like that. They didn't like this or that government. They didn't like Bibi Netanyahu or something. But the basic consensus and framework of being pro-Israel was taken for granted. And if there were any questions, when I was in college, it was about the post-67 world. But now, even among our just completely firmly Orthodox students, people raised in Zioni shuls and schools their entire life, that is not taken for granted anymore. And there are people who still show up in Armenian every week, every day, who have really, really deep questions and objections to what they see as what is the Zionist consensus. And other people know that about them. And this is raising really, really powerful, urgent questions about the constitution of our community and what we stand for. And for us as rabbis and educators, It's an incredibly complicated time where we're facing what I think are really new problems. I don't think they're not radically new. There have been versions of this in the past, but it's reached a level of acuity where I think we can't ignore it anymore. And we need to be very deliberately, thoughtfully trying to formulate a response in real time about how we're going to handle this.
What you're saying, I think, is so true, but I think the way we're looking at it already is something which we need to, if not question, I don't know if we need to really question it, but it's something we need to be aware of, which is that we are saying that our view has been pretty much the main view for most of our existence. And all of a sudden, it's not the main view. And so you could look at it as, okay, all of a sudden, there are people that are wrong in our community and more people that are wrong than used to be wrong. And so how do we help these people who are wrong? Or is it, this is the main view, and all of a sudden, there's more than one view? And so what do we do with the fact that there's more than one view and with all the challenges that come along with it?
Yeah, so I think if I'm hearing you right, Don, like there's no question that part of what it's going to take, especially if we don't want, and I we'll talk about this more explicitly, if we don't want to give up on the leftmost parts of our community and the people who really are struggling on that side and who are charting new territory, it is going to require some measure of humility. And we'll come back to that. I think we need to be able to genuinely listen and hear where they're coming from and show that we understand it. And that involves a kind of vulnerability and humility. I feel like maybe they have really good points. Maybe they're saying things that our community needs to reflect on that we haven't, and we just haven't considered properly yet. And then maybe if we did consider those things, there's a real openness to the possibility we would need to shift things to some extent. But at the same time, I think it's really important. It's just part of the process of education, even if you're and leadership, even if you're open and vulnerable to changing, which I think is vital. We also still have a perspective, and the community is coming from a certain place and has been in a certain place, and there's a kind of just momentum and inertia that I don't think is illegitimate. I think that if you want to maintain the integrity of any community, you can't just fly from one position to another, and you have the place you start from, and the conversation proceeds from that place. And everyone is going to have to understand that's going to be it requires some respect for that.
Yeah, I think that last point is really interesting. And I'm trying to figure out what the right way is to formulate it, because you're right that you don't have to, and you shouldn't necessarily like go around questioning every single thing that your community or you in your own life think and decide to change it whenever there's a possibility that maybe it should be changed in some sort of drastic way. And so, meaning you don't need to go around looking for those things, but there's also, like, to a certain extent, a balance that you need to be somewhat self-aware and self-examined. But when you are confronted with the possibility, or with the reality that there are people who do question some of those really basic things, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, and so again, like I do think there's and I found in practice, it works to just show genuine humility and openness and really actually listen. And you ask follow-up questions, and you can adjust your own points and point of view just a little bit to show that, and to really mean that you are listening and you're taking them seriously.
Hold on a second. When you talk about having humility, and that's important, but it's so hard with something like this, especially with something which we have so much conviction and is so true, and Israel is something which is super important to the Jewish people. And even if you'll admit to a certain extent that Israel isn't perfect and it's not the perfect country and everything, there's a difference between admitting that it's not a perfect country and questioning whether or not it's advisable to have justice reform. That's something that's much greater and attacks kind of like what the entire state is, or it really just goes against anything about what I feel about something which is so important and seems to be such an important part of Jewish identity and Jewish communal identity.
I think that's really important, and it's actually a great segue into some of what I wanted to share today. Because I think what we need to do, part of what I hear you expressing, is that the anxiety levels are so high. These things are so important and so vital. and so central to who we are as Jews, and who we are as Jews is so central to who we are, period. And so it feels, these things feel existential when basic central tenets of our commitments to the state of Israel are questioned and put under a question mark. And then that makes conversations impossible when the anxiety levels are too high and we feel like we either need to shut the conversation down or exclude a person from the community. And where they feel like they simply can't be a part of our community because they know that we are too anxious to have them around. And so I wanted to share one text that I, out of many, but one in particular that I come back to regularly in many contexts, but that I've especially drawn on in this context. And it's a text that I draw on both in speaking to and guiding students in this left-wing position where they are finding themselves. Maybe they've always been there, or maybe they've, in the last year or two or three since they've become post high school adults, they've come to a deeply critical stance on the state of Israel and Israel's conduct. A text which I use to help them think about what it can mean, what it should mean for them to conduct themselves in relation to the Jewish community as responsible members of the Jewish communities. Like, so you've come to this political view through your own good faith, highly intelligent reflection and research and conversation, and you found yourself holding these views. You also were raised as a part of the Jewish community, or just feel like you want to be a part of it because it's a part of who you are. And that's making life very complicated for you. And I want to help you think about what it would look like to take responsibility for your relationship with the Jewish community and take responsibility for the Jewish community as such while holding the views that you do. And on the other side, I want to think about, for those of us who are a part of some part of the mainstream pro-Israel consensus, but who are seeing young people, especially young people, young Jews who are passionate and committed and thoughtful and smart and intelligent, and again are showing up at Minyan every day, and they're leaders in our communities, and they're amazing and unimpeachably great Jews, but they have found themselves holding these views. We are finding them holding these views. And how do we think about what we owe to them and how to express what we owe to them, even as maybe we'll talk more explicitly later, like we are going to have to do on a communal level, we may have to do a little more work making clear what our boundaries are. So anyway, with that long introduction, here's the text I want to teach. It comes from Psikta Rav Kahana. It is just in general side points. Everyone should learn Psikta Rav Kahana and Psikta Rabati. Psikta, just incredibly rich, largely unmined texts. Just people understand the most midrashim are structured like Seder Parshiot. They're just in the order of the texts. So if you want to learn a midrash on a passage in Parshat Truma, so you open up your Tanchuma on Parshat Truma, or you open up your Shemot Rabbah on Tanchuma and you find it there. The Psiktot are structured calendrically. So it's every week where there's a special Torah reading or a special Haftorah, you get an entry on that special Torah reading or Haftorah. And it's a collection of midrashim. And so you're getting from the very people, the group in Chazal who gave us our liturgical calendar, said this is what you should be reading on this week. You get, and this is what you should be thinking about while you're reading it. And it's like from the very source itself. So it's just incredibly rich and helpful and not sufficiently tapped resource for reflective Jewish life. Anyway, with that totally unnecessary tangent, this is from the Psikta Rav Kahana on Psikta B'chodesh HaShlishi, the beginning of the account of the giving of the Torah in Parshat Yitro, which we read on Shavuot. The Chazal pick up on it's like a really interesting, very obvious on the surface tension between the two halves of Parshas Yitro, which we just read last week, when we're at the time of recording. I don't know when this will come out. The beginning of Parshas Yitro is Yitro shows up, meets the Jewish people in the desert, He heard about all the amazing things that his son-in-law Moshe did, and that God did for his son-in-law and the entire Jewish people, and he's overjoyed, and he comes to meet them, and there's a warm embrace between the two, and Moshe bows down, and they share a meal, and reunited. Moshe's reunited with his family. Yitro the father-in-law has some advice for how his son-in-law ought to run his business, and Moshe very kindly and dutifully accepts his father-in-law's advice. And then at the end of the story, you get V'yishlach Moshe et Chodno, if I'm quoting it right. Moshe sends away his father-in-law, V'yilchu el artzo, and then his father-in-law leaves and goes back to Midian.
All right, Dad, that's enough.
Yeah. He goes back. And then immediately, B'chodesh HaShlishi, say, Bnei Yisrael Eretz Yisrael, Ba'u Midbar Sinai. On the third month, the Jewish people, having left Egypt, come after the third month, they come to the desert of Sinai, and that's the beginning of the story of Matan Torah. And so there are various views already in Chazal as to the right order of the story, in terms of the actual chronology. But as written, they follow one after the other with no transition. It's just V'yishlach Moshe Chono v'yilchu artzo, and then B'chodesh HaShlishi Ba'u Midbar Sinai. It's like, what's that story about? And more pointedly, like, why the juxtaposition, and why does Moshe send his father-in-law away, and why does his father-in-law want to leave? It's strange, right? Chazal think Yitro was a great scholar of world religions. He studied all of them. So, like, obviously he would want to be at Matan Torah to see, like, the greatest religious event, theophany of all time. And, if nothing else, it's just an amazing spectacle. To see the thunder and lightning and hear God's voice, like, who wouldn't want to be there? And, personally, for Yitro, and for Moshe, like, this is the acme of Moshe's career. He's finally, when Moshe met Yitro, he was a penniless refugee who, he did a valiant deed to rescue his daughter, but, like, he was a nobody, and Yitro gave him a job in the family shepherding business, but like now, and then Moshe says, "Look, by the way, Dad, I'm on a mission from God. I have to go save the Jewish people or something." And he's like, "Sure, buddy, whatever. I'll see you later." And then he actually does. And then now he's finally going to reach the pinnacle of his career, receive the Torah. And it's like, why wouldn't Yitro want to be there for that? Why wouldn't Moshe want him there for that? And so that's what Chazal, like, in the background, that's the question that I think they're working through. So here's what they say. So Maksiv L'Malamina Inyan Parshat Yitro Mashu Melamidas Moshe. So we see it just gives a recounting of the story. He teaches Moshe, you should pick great people, and so this is the advice Yitro gives him. And then immediately after that story, B'chodesh HaShlishi, you get in the third month. And so then just asking, like, what's this? It tells the story of Yitro, and then immediately after the story of Matan Torah, what's that about? So Amar Shlomo, there's a standard midrashic form. It's the kind of game where you introduce the pasuk and Chumash you're going to talk about, and then you put forward a pasuk from Ketuvim somewhere, and then you have to work back as through commenting on the pasuk in Ketuvim to get back to the local topic in Chumash. So quote a verse in Mishlei. Amar Shlomo says, Levi Udei Marat Nafsho. The heart, the individual heart, knows the bitterness of its own soul, and only the individual heart knows the bitterness of its own soul. This is the part of the tragedy of the human condition. Right? That, like, you can see someone else suffering, and know that they're suffering, and know that they're in pain, but only the individual in pain really knows what it's like. Really knows what it feels like on the inside to be suffering the particular pain with a particular texture that they're going through. There's no way to fully communicate that. There's no way for anyone else to fully participate in that unless they're participating in the pain themselves. So lefikach, and therefore, this is interpolated. Right? So the pasuk is lev yodea marat nafsho. Only the individual heart knows the bitterness of its soul. And a foreigner, a stranger, cannot participate, be involved in the joy of the heart. And Chazal read this as lefikach v'simchato yiter avzar. So because only the individual heart can know the bitterness of its own soul, therefore no one else can participate in the heart's joy. And so Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is what Hashem says. And so apparently this is not something that Yitro understood. It's not something that Moshe understood. And learning this message, what we're about to learn, is a part of Moshe's training that Hashem provides, and his induction into what it means to be the Jewish people and receiving the Torah. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, Yisrael hayu meshubadim batit ubilvenim Mitzrayim. My children, the Jewish people, were suffering in bondage with plaster and bricks in Egypt. They were suffering under hard labor. They were in pain and distress. V'yitro, Yoshev betoch beito hashke duvetach. Yitro is sitting at home, and he's safe and secure and tranquil. This isn't a critique of Yitro, I don't think, because there's nothing. Why shouldn't he have been in Midian? Why shouldn't he have been safe and secure? There's no reason why he should have gone and subjected himself to enslavement for no reason. And even if he had shown up in Egypt, there's nothing he could have done, at least on the surface, nothing he could have done to make anything better. Why? If he'd asked, like, should I come? Obviously, stay at home, stay safe.
I think that's a different midrash that faults Yitro for not being there.
Yeah, and there are other versions.
Not this one.
And there are other midrashim where he plays a role in Paro's council. But here, I don't think it's necessary for this passage, right? It's just the sheer fact that he is at home, safe and secure, and now uval lirot b'simchat haTorah im banai. And now he wants to show up and participate in the joy of Torah and the joy of receiving the Torah with my children. No, it can't be. If you weren't there when things were hard and when the chips were down and when my people were suffering, and you weren't there with the people suffering alongside them, you cannot be there for the reception of the Torah. And therefore, Moshe sends away his father-in-law, and then immediately after, you get the reception of the Torah once Yitro has left. I would spell this out in two layers. Like, one is just that the Torah is not, maybe it is also a body of ideas and wisdom and the sort of thing you can just put in a book. And in fact, you can go to Barnes & Noble and buy the book, and anybody can do that, and anybody can read it. And, they should, maybe they should, arguably they should, they can gain a lot of wisdom and become better people through it. And Yitro could certainly do that. But the Torah for the Jewish people is something different than that. It's not just a body of wisdom. It's our way of life that proceeds from our solidarity together as a community. It belongs to and is meant to give expression. It belongs to the Jewish people and is meant to give expression to the Jewish people's commitment to each other and to suffering together in history and to surviving and flourishing together despite their suffering in history. And you cannot be a part of that. You can't be a part of the experience of Torah on that level unless you were there when things were hard, unless you were there when there was suffering and pain and distress. If you want to be a part of the joy of the heart, you have to have been there and really known from the inside the pain of the heart. You have to be a part of that heart, that collective heart. And so Yitro, and I don't think it needs to be a critique. He didn't do anything wrong, but he wasn't there. And so he simply can't. It's not coherent for him to participate in the receiving of the Torah. I would go half a layer deeper.
But can I just ask?
Yeah,
is this prescriptive or descriptive? Is he not allowed to be there, or would it just not work?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. Hashem does. This is what I was saying. Moshe doesn't get this at first, right? This is something Hashem has to teach him. But Hashem says, no, you should send him away. And actually, the Midrash continues. There's another version of how they learn this from the fact that a Ben Nechar can't participate in the Korban Pesach, and it's sort of Kal V'chomer. If they can't participate in that, surely they can't participate in the entire reception of the Torah. And there, it's like Moshe figuring it out himself, and not just Hashem telling him.
From the opening pasuk that talked about how you can't know how a person really experiences something, it seems to be that it just wouldn't compute. It wouldn't be that. It stems from the fact that he would not be able to understand or appreciate the Torah in a way that was necessary in order to experience it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one layer to this, that it just wouldn't mean the same thing or mean the right thing to him. It just wouldn't be coherent. But I also I don't know, just reading it, I get the sense of it would be a kind of offense. You show up at the party, but you weren't there when things were rough. You can't just show up when things are good. Use a very bad analogy. Like they're fair weather sports fans. You're like they're at the stadium when like the team all of a sudden is doing great and goes on an amazing playoff run. But it's like it's the people that for the people who were there when the team was terrible and still showed up in the cold every single day and they were in the bleachers. Like there's a kind of resentment at the people who just show up when things are great. Like you can't do that. It doesn't mean the same
Right.
thing.
If it wouldn't be, it's not. It's almost that from the fact that Yitro wouldn't be able to appreciate it properly because he didn't have the right origin story, that excludes him from being able to appreciate it properly, and therefore excludes him from having permission to be there because it wouldn't be appropriate. It
Yeah,
wouldn't be
I think that's
appropriate
right.
for him to be there in a way that he would to hear the Torah in a way similar to how you see in Chazal people who were uncomfortable with translation of the Torah because it's all of a sudden accessible to people who. I mean, there it might be a little bit dangerous, but all of a sudden it's accessible to more people and people who don't understand it, and it's not part of their culture. And being able to pick up a book off of shelf in the library is not going to give you the same kind of knowledge that you need in order to truly understand it as people who whose culture it comes from.
He's not equipped to understand it properly, and even to the extent he just does not have the right kind of standing. And there's something about what it means for the Jewish people to accept the Torah that has to flow from their history of shared suffering together. And I didn't want to go down a Soloveitchik rabbit hole here, but it's like this is his Brit Goral and Brit Yehud, where there's our destiny as Jews, or our telos as Jews, we're supposed to, the meaning and purpose that we're meant to pursue, which is Torah and mitzvot, and building a life, a communal life, a national life of Torah and mitzvot. That's what we're after and what we're doing this for. But that has to flow from and be grounded on our experience of solidarity and suffering together, and the fact that we are thrown together into bondage in Egypt and then later through the history of our communal dispersion and suffering, and everything that means. And so again, and those things are inseparable, right? They're just these two poles of Jewish identity that you can't disentangle. And there's a kind of priority on both ends. So there's the telos, what it's about, what we're trying to do, and that's the Torah, to build a communal life of Torah. But that the more basic, like fundamental and the animating engine of it is our experience of being together and suffering. And so actually, I want to go one level deeper here. The phrasing in the Midrash is not just that Ubali Roach be Matan Torah, or just Kabbalat Torah, that Yitro wants to be part of the receiving of the Torah in general, but it's specifically Simchat HaTorah that Yitro wants to participate in which he can't participate in. And so maybe it's the case that even if he could have received the Torah in some way, but he can't be part of the joy of the Torah. And so what's that about? And I want to say that, Torah in the best of circumstances is really hard. It makes really heavy demands from us. It calls us to push beyond what we're normally capable of, or what we might have aspired to for ourselves, and that's difficult. And also figuring out what the Torah demands from us, discerning that is really complicated. And if you have more than one individual Jewish person who is doing the work of sincerely, thoughtfully, intelligently trying to figure out what the Torah wants from us in a given case, there's probably going to be some disagreements. And that disagreement can be really tense and hard and difficult. The Gemara says that when two friends sit down to learn together, they're nasu ko'evim zelaz, they're like enemies to each other. They really are. There's real enmity. Elsewhere the Gemara calls learning Torah milchama. It really is a war. Like it's not. You walk into a base medrash, and if they're doing it right, it feels that way. People get angry and worked up, and they mean it. Like there's something really personal at stake in getting the answer right, and therefore disagreement is actually it's hurtful and painful and difficult. And yet, if it's done right, when they stand up, they're chaverim again. They're friends, and there's a kind of really, really deep joy in having been able to do the work of arguing, really, really arguing and fighting about what the Torah wants from us. Is a joy of being able to do that against the background of trust that when you stand up and that you'll be friends again. Going in and during and then afterwards, there's the actual joy, realized joy. of realizing that you were just able to have a really difficult argument with somebody and with a friend, and that you're closer with them now than you were before. And this comes up in with couples and any kind of relationship, any kind of community. Like arguments and disagreement can be we can naturally want to pull away and say we can't deal with the tension, we can't deal with the difficulty. If you have a real relationship and the relationship is done right, then moments of disagreement and tension are opportunities for pulling together. If you've done the work right in preparation and leading up there, then it will be an opportunity for pulling together and feeling emerging stronger for the tension. What I want to suggest is that what makes the Torah of Simcha, what makes it possible to participate in the Simcha of Torah, where within the Jewish community we're going to have really deep disagreements about what the Torah wants from us. In order for that to be an opportunity for Simcha, it has to be against the background of shared solidarity in historical suffering and distress. It has to be the case that we are there for each other and we have each other's backs and we show up for each other and we care for each other. And there's a kind of baseline identification with the community in cases of communal pain and distress. And everyone has to know that. You have to know that all of the Jews you are actually or could potentially be arguing with, that every single Jew knows that every other Jew in the community has their back and would show up for them and acknowledge and honor and care for them in their communal pain. And so what I offer to our students let's start with students on the far left who are starting to emerge with a point of view that is deeply critical of the community in which they were raised and deeply critical of the Jewish state, which is an object of deep love and commitment for their community. And that's going to be really, really hard. And yeah, like so many of them are doing it out of an incredibly sincere, genuine, thoughtful, and intelligent mode of a kind of Talmud Torah, of trying to figure out what Hashem wants from us through his teachings. And precisely on that basis, they're saying that they're holding the community to account, and they're saying we need to think about things differently. We need to do things differently. Yes, that's right. But if you want to be able to put forward that point of view, and you want to be able to be heard, and you want to be able to continue to be a responsible member of the Jewish community, you're going to need to also, in addition to that, you're going to need to be able to make clear that you understand the community's pain and you understand why and exactly what it meant on October 7th and afterwards, where our community was in the deepest distress we've been in recent memory. You need to show up in the right ways and honor that grief, and you need to continue to honor that grief, and you need to continue precisely in what you say and in how you go about leveling the critique you're going to level. It needs to be put forward with a kind of patience and love and respect, and making clear that you really, really do get it, that this community is in pain and distress, and more basically, also, you can start to ask important questions about what happened in 1948 and were there intentional expulsions, or not, or incidental expulsions, whatever it was that was going on. You can start asking those questions and start wondering about, was this really the right way to go? There were other versions of Zionism that proposed other models. But if you don't at the same time completely understand and sympathize with the fact that the Jewish people were a nation of refugees who'd suffered for 2,000 years, suffered quite plausibly as a result of statelessness, and for good and understandable reasons thought that having a Jewish state was the right way to go about protecting themselves. If you don't or if you aren't able to show some real understanding of what that was about and what that continues to mean and what that has come to mean, given that the state was actually founded and now has millions of Jews in it and is the largest Jewish population center, and will soon be the home of the majority of the Jewish people. And if you can't understand and show that you understand and respect that this now is the place where the Jews are and where the Jews live, and that you care about that and are committed to all of those Jews being safe and secure going forward, then you're not going to be able to have the kinds of conversations you want to be able to have. You're not going to be able to participate in the Torah as simcha, and you're going to risk doing violence to the community, and you're going to risk chas v'shalom. You're going to risk falling outside of the communal boundaries. But positively, if you can make clear to the Jewish community that you really do get it. You understand the pain, you understand the fear, you understand the history, you identify with it, you're a part of it, you feel that pain too. You are desperately searching for the right way to provide safety and security and show respect for the Jewish people's right of self-determination, and to figure out how, on their own terms, they're going to be able to do what they need to not be scared that not go to sleep being scared that their children are going to be hit with a rocket or massacred in their sleep. If you can show that you really do mean that, and you really are, you identify with it, you're a part of it, you're not just sitting hashkei uvetach somewhere else, you haven't written yourself out of that community of concern, then you will be able to say, what about this, and are we giving due consideration to that, and maybe we should start to think about things differently. Maybe you really can move the conversation, but it's gonna have to proceed on the basis of clear communal identification with distress, and the love and care that requires. But then on the other side, I think there's a corollary responsibility for those of us who do find ourselves within the mainstream pro-Israel Zionist consensus, somewhere in that spectrum. If we want to be able to put forward the message, like, yes, you can be critical, even in deep ways that we're not used to, but that has to be on the basis of love and commitment. But we have to really mean that. And part of what that means is that these young Jews are also finding themselves in a place of really deep pain and distress. And it has to be the case for the very same reason. It's the very same message. These are Jews too. They're in pain, and we have to honor their pain and their distress. Not maybe we don't want to agree with the reasons for it, but we have to honor the fact that they are a part of our historical community of suffering, and they're committed members of our process of figuring out what the Torah is asking from us. And so we can't just write them off, and we have to be genuinely open and trying and reaching out to embrace them as a part of our historical community of solidarity and concern. And we have to really mean it. And they have to know that we mean it. And we have to know that they have to know that we love them as individuals, as Jews. We love them much more basically than any concerns we have about their political views. To feel that and know that anytime they're willing to play ball and show the right kinds of respect and care, that they'll be welcomed with open arms, despite the very real tensions, which we're not going to sort out in the next few months or years. It's going to take a lifetime of work.
There are a couple of points that just came to mind as you were speaking that I think are addressed in a really wonderful and elegant way by the Torah that you just shared with us. Because one of the questions that I had as you were beginning to speak about the issue of having people coming from another perspective, coming from from what you were saying, the far left, and questioning something that is part of the mainstream view, and you're talking about people who had come by it honestly. And so one of my questions was, how do you know if you've come by it honestly? But here, with the way that you described it, you don't have to worry about that, because it doesn't matter. Because what matters most is the attitude that you're coming with to the conversation. And so once you have an attitude of some sort of connection and love, and that kind of enables you to be vulnerable to a certain extent so that you can connect with people you're talking to, it'll all get discussed, and it'll all get washed out. And whether you're coming by it honestly or not, the fact that you are having these kinds of ideas and conversations about them can just corrects for that and accounts for any sort of other error that may have come about in the method that led you to your conclusion.
Don, I think that's exactly right, and exactly the right insight. And again, I don't want to say that we shouldn't have a substantive perspective on anything. Like there are things we actually believe in. I mean, there's history that we think is right, a set of facts that we think are important, and that we want to be able to bring into any conversation. And so when I say when I talk about coming by honestly, I'm not even sure exactly what that meant. I just meant people like reading reasonable books and doing research in thoughtful and intelligent ways, doing the hard work of trying to learn and figure things out in ways that are intellectually and spiritually serious. But still, like regardless, I think your insight is exactly right. Like, it's not like we're ever in a position to, or fully in a position to say like you're in or out or right or wrong based on how well you've done this work. It's just not relevant, and that's not how actual human conversations work, and it's not how actual communities work. Like, you're always starting in the middle. You realize somebody holds a certain view, or it comes up in conversation, or they want to talk to you about it. But so it's not like, so when I was in second grade, I was taught this, and then I did that. Like it just doesn't matter exactly what the process was, and it also, to a certain extent, doesn't matter exactly what the views are. Or exactly what form the questions take, or exactly what form the positions take. I think part of what I'm after here is, and a kind of relativizing, but not a relativism where there's no right and wrong, but there is a kind of personal indexing. What matters is the spiritual quality of the interaction and the kinds of commitments that are underlying the conversation. And when you're focused on that, the specific questions of they have this view or that position or they came to it this way are just, it's not that they don't matter at all, but they matter much less. And it is just often the case, even things that would be out of bounds in other contexts, if they're in the context of love and care and a sense of communal solidarity, can have those conversations. And I'll just say, like, there are a lot of Jewish students on campus who will never in a million years talk to me because I work for multiple Zionist institutions, the Orthodox Union and JLIC and Hillel. And our Hillel has a big Israeli flag flying in front, and therefore many Jewish students on campus will never step foot in here. And they would have no interest in talking to me, except maybe to yell at me across the quad. But there are a lot of students, including many of the students who were out there protesting last year and leading the encampments, and which caused a huge amount of distress and pain, real distress and pain for our community. There are many of them who, not just that they're willing to talk to me, they're desperate to talk to me, because they have these unresolved parts of their Jewish identity. They really are connected, either because of their history or because of what they want now and where they're moving towards. They want to be a part of the established Jewish community. And they want to be in relationship with it. They want that for all kinds of reasons. They want it for religious reasons. They want to be a part of good, just well-run, flourishing minyanim. They want to be a part of the musical culture. They want to just whatever it is. They want to be a part of Shabbos culture. And to an extent, they want to be a part of the conversation on Israel that the establishment Jewish community is having. And they are looking for that through traditional forums, and they want to be talking to rabbis and educators. I'm going to share, and we'll decide whether we edit this out or not. But like one of the most poignant moments I had last year was a student who was very involved in leading the protest encampments last year. And an amazing young Jewish woman, really just extraordinarily brilliant and thoughtful and caring about the community, and that's going to come out. She was in the Hillel building, and I sat down next to her. We were chatting for a little bit, and it was a difficult time. And she said, Rabbi, I feel very conflicted because I know that my actions and my organizing has caused this community an immense amount of pain and distress. And yet, and so, and I feel that by being here and those people seeing me, I'm causing them more distress. I'm compounding it, because now the source of their distress is right here in the community, in their very community, in their very building. So my being here is causing more pain to the Jewish community, and at the same time, I need to be here. I need to be a part of the community. I need to be with the community, and I don't know how to resolve that. I don't remember exactly what I said in response, But what I tried to convey, and what's still just I'm still ruminating over and trying to work through is, like, this is something I think we can work with. It's really it's twisted in knots, but this is somebody giving really powerful articulation, a really direct articulation in a remarkable way to a kind of baseline communal identification, a deep desire to figure out how this is going to work and how she can conduct herself in such a way that she can be a part of the Jewish community. And I think, an easy thing to say is, well, stop it with organizing protests and stop it with holding the views that you hold, and then it'll be fine. On a certain level, I actually think that's right. So I think, I do think organizing the protests was maybe not the best idea if you want to be a part of the Jewish community. And I think they actually did a lot of work at Yale in particular to make the protests a lot less bad than they were other places. That was because of our incredibly thoughtful and committed Jewish students trying to make it less bad. But still, like, and I want to help you think about how you can give expression to your political views, and object to the state of Israel's actions in ways that don't feel like and aren't plausibly read as a betrayal of our basic commitments. But at the same time, I understand you're 21, and yes, you're brilliant, and you have an overdeveloped intellect for a 21-year-old, and you're highly competent and capable. But also, I understand, like, you're on a journey. You haven't figured this out yet. You're trying to figure things out in real time. And I'm an educator, and I'm a rabbi. My job can't just be to put you in one class or the other, or put you in a box and say you're one of the bad ones. I see that you're on a journey. I see that you really are genuinely working these things through. You're struggling in a very pointed way to figure out, given where you are right now politically, how you're going to be in real, meaningful relationship with the Jewish community. And I want to help you do that. And we're going to keep talking. All I know is that I don't know what the end result is, because I'm not smart enough to figure it out yet. But I know that we need to keep talking, and we need to find some way to keep you in relationship with this community, and to keep you coming here, and to keep you as part of our minyanim and part of our Shabbos experience, because this level and this form and depth of passion and commitment and love is something that we need, and I'm willing to sacrifice it. And you're an amazing young Jew, and we need to find some way to continue, precisely because, again, like, whatever our disagreement is on where we're going and what we ought to be doing, we clearly, very poignantly share this more visceral, just basic, fundamental horizon of shared communal solidarity. We are the same community. That's why we keep bumping into each other, and why you keep showing up here and making trouble, and why that's so hard. Precisely why it's hard is because of the love we share. And so we're going to have to work this out.
Yeah, it's incredible. She's really lucky to have had someone like you to talk to.
Thank you. I hope so.
I know so. Before we end, I want to ask you one question that's somewhat related to this, but definitely related to the Midrash. And that is, I can understand that it's important for someone to have this kind of attitude and this kind of sense of belonging and connectedness in order to engage in certain conversations. But the Midrash, I always think, needs to be read not as replacing, but in conjunction with what we see in the Torah. What we see in the Torah is that Yitro was somebody who offered a critique, and one that was really important and really helpful. So where is there a space for something like that?
No, that's good, Don. But I think that's exactly the point, right? Moshe is actually, and I was joking about it at the beginning. Father-in-law shows up and says, you should be doing this differently, you should be doing that differently. Why is your cupboard organized this way? It's like, why do you do this or that with your car, or not do this or that with your car? And Moshe is receptive. He's willing to listen. It's like somebody just shows up out of nowhere and, like, you're doing everything wrong, try this. And Moshe's like, yeah, you're right. Actually, and Moshe has a good track record of this. Sometimes he consults with God beforehand, but, like, people show up and say, actually, I think this is right. You're Moshe, actually, I think maybe women should be able to inherit land, and it's like, well, God, I hadn't thought about it. And no, that's right. And I think that we talked about humility a little bit before, like, that kind of humility and openness can be so hard, especially when, things are high stakes, and we do need to draw boundaries, and we do need to define who we are. Um, but like, and I, on this issue, I want to be clear. Like, they're we're certainly not like going to be swallowing anything that the far left is saying in any kind of wholesale way. But I do think it is important to be able to genuinely listen, hear what they're saying, both on the level of just the actual content, like there's this or that critique of Israel, and maybe that entails certain responsibilities. And so, even if we think, because of Israel's need for safety and security, and because of the legitimacy of the reasons why Israel has done what it's done and the pressures under which Israel has done what it's done. So, we think certain forms of recompense or restitution or repair are not appropriate or are not called for. But there might be other things we can do to right some of the historical wrongs, or just to do better going forward. And just to be able to have those conversations and talk about those things openly, and to like lower the temperature. It's not, if the state of Israel as a human institution, it like any other human institution has probably done a lot of not great things, and the first group of people to tell you that would be Israelis. And so, that's going to be important, and just to be able to listen and hear that, but also on the level of the way they feel. I talk to a lot of young Jews who are saying very loudly, very clearly, that they feel their voices and themselves, they are being excluded from the Jewish community. They're being driven out of the Jewish community. They're being told, in sometimes tacit, but often explicit terms, that people who have the kinds of views that they have are not welcome in our spaces. And you either need to keep it quiet, or you're going to need to get out. And again, I don't want to say that's like presumptively wrong. We have a strong history of using cherem and just concepts of kfirah, which usually flow out of some kind of threat to communal solidarity, where somebody's saying like there's a consensus, and there's a consensus that the community needs for its safety and for its integrity, and then I'm going to go around telling people that it's wrong and denying it. And we have tools for that. We have a tradition of dealing with that. It's not like, I'm by no means kind of easygoing pluralist where everything goes. But at the same time, I think we should take seriously when somebody they actually are a committed member of our community. They have that track record, and they're really saying they want to show up and they want to be a part of it, and they've shown real devotion. And I don't want to make the bar too high. It's just, I think we should presume people are acting in good faith. They really do want to be a part of the community. And if that's what they're saying, then they mean it. And so then the response, at least the first response, shouldn't be, look, if you hold these views or asking these questions, you're out. It should be, when I'm arguing for it, the response should be, let's work together on ways that we can give real expression to what you're saying in ways that the community will be able to hear and process. And that's going to be slow. It's going to be frustrating. You're not going to get everything you want because, like the basic structure and consensus of the community is going to be what it is. And that's the kinds of views that you're asking for are not going to get the same kind of platforming and public expression that center Zionist views get. You're not going to get parity in that way. You shouldn't expect it. And if you are expecting it, you're going to be disappointed. So it's probably best to just give up. But at the same time, like you should be demanding a kind of respect, a kind of recognition for just the integrity of where you're coming from, and a willingness to listen and an openness to remaining in conversation and relationship. And therefore, so I'm going back to myself as an educator, ourselves as educators and rabbis, and therefore I want to work with you and figure out how you can do this right, which is on some level an unfair burden, right? Like, why should it be their job to figure out how they're going to present themselves in exactly the right way so that they don't upset sensitivities too much? But I think that's the reality. Like, you want to be a part of this established community that has its identity. Yeah, it turns out that's really hard to do sometimes. If you're a thoughtful person, that's always going to be hard no matter what. You're going to have weird views on something. And I want to help you do it, and I'm going to show you that I mean it by actually spending the time with you, actually listening to you, being vulnerable to you, and to some extent being willing to go out on a limb to protect you, and to show you that you belong.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said, it's not about what's fair or what's not fair, because really, if you care about someone and you want them to improve and you want to be heard and maybe even improve a little bit yourself, there's only one way to do it, and that's by being sensitive to the other people. And if you're truly committed to that kind of improvement and that kind of value, then that's the kind of attitude that you're going to take.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I really like. I think where I'd want to end is my messianic view for what the future of the Jewish community's relationship with Israel is going forward, and what state of Israel and what that means for us as a nation. I do think it's going to involve, it always has involved, and I think will continue to involve, in new and interesting and difficult ways, making it possible for as much of the Jewish community as we can to find its place in a kind of like integral Jewish consensus towards its shared destiny together, which is going to be on the basis of our shared history of solidarity and suffering. We're going to find some way to articulate a vision of our future and to make real our commitment to a vision of our future that includes the entirety of the Jewish people, religiously, spiritually, politically. So that's going to mean, again, one last time, that people on the far left are, if they want to be a part of that vision, they're going to have to find ways to make clear that whatever they want to see this or that happen in Israel, that it's still a matter of love and commitment to the Jewish people and to its safety and security and flourishing and its ultimate destiny. For people on the center and right, it's going to be we are a nation of the Jewish people, and we want the state of Israel to be a state of the Jewish people, and not just one subset of it or the other. We're going to find ways to make that real and clear.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Alex.
This is a good time, Don. Next time we should probably get a guest again.
Yeah, this is pretty fun too.
All right, yeah. Anyway, I had a good time. Talk to you later, man.
Thanks.